I want to tell you about Texas radio and the Big B. It was a warm summer night with our song playing on the radio.
We're in for a good show today. It's Mike Matthews, who basically grew up at Cayman and is still with it. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, guys. Good to see you all again, and glad to be talking about one of the favorite chapters of my life, Cayman 129, and really, really love speaking about it. First of all, I think most of the guys that were in the business know that Jerry Jolstad was my stepfather. He was the general manager of Cayman. He's the one that assembled everything and put all the DJs together, hired Bill Watson, got it all together. And he had come from KFXM. He was a previous sales manager at KFXM. He was friends with Howard Tullis, the owner of KFXM, Bob Bunnell and Al Anthony and all those guys. And then when they went to Cayman in 1962, he brought with him a number of the former DJs at KFXM, Gary Price, who was, a very good DJ in 1959, 1960, Bill Tanner, who was also another popular disc jockey at that time, Lyle Kilgore, who was the news person, eventually came to Cayman. And so that was the nucleus of how they started. Cayman was so popular at that time. Those first 3 or 4 years wasn't even close.
Oh, they owned it.
Yeah, it was really, and most people, including Al Anthony, agree with that. Al is a talented guy, a great program director, came from Bakersfield, a good friend of mine unto this day. And he certainly was a knowledgeable guy. But when you get the momentum going, and it was just assaulting to the senses when Cayman jingles would come on and you'd hear Bill Watson or Brian Lord or Chuck Clemens. I mean, these guys were so mega popular that it would have been hard for anybody at that time to really compete with them on that basis.
Why do you think the momentum shifted?
I think that it was a slow, gradual. The KFXM signal was so huge. The rating services, which at that time, they had just gone from Hooper, which Hooper Rating was the big name of the company that did the ratings during those early years. And then they moved to Pulse, and then they moved to Arbitron, which basically broke things into total survey areas. Well, the total survey area, Cayman didn't even represent a half of it. KFXM covered all of it. So, and of course, when the larger the survey area, it allowed more LA intrusion into the area or determined what it was and saw people who were listening to KFI. How do you compete with that? 50,000 watt clear channel, and all the FM started coming in, KLOS, KMET, all of those stations were, had great listenership, KNX FM, the Mellow Sound, the Mellow Touch, all of those things came into play. And so it was just a gradual decline of San Bernardino listenership, which I think, to a certain degree was impeded when KGGI came along. I think that kind of brought back some identity. And I think K-Frog and some of these stations, began to develop their own identity within San Bernardino. But it was really hard. San Bernardino was just lost its own identity as a market. And I think that they never regained it again. People would rather listen to the LA stations, particularly during the early 70s. And KCAL, where Ted had gone over, that was a great station. They had the album-oriented rock format, and they were very popular during that time. Everybody liked, if you liked the hard rock scene, that was where you go. And he did real well there. Cayman was owned by a company called Colgren Broadcasting Company. And basically, Ron Jacobs was the consultant or program director of KPOI in Honolulu, which was their sister station. And their other station was KMAK in Bakersfield. So there was 3 of them. And they all basically ran the same type of format as per Ron Jacobs. And so when they came into Cayman, of course, the story of Ron Jacobs and Bill Watson was very famous. And we know they later went on to work with Drake Chenault, with KHJ, and the formation of Boss Radio. So they came, and this was during their years before they went into major market radio. So my involvement came, of course, my stepdad was in this position, and Jim Markham, who was the chief engineer of Cayman at that time, also did some weekend stuff. Everybody had a bit of an on-air role there at that time in 1962 when they first started, either as weekend or special events. So my involvement came when I was 14 years old, and I became a gopher for Jim when they would take the station off the air every Sunday night at midnight. Sunday night, Monday morning, most stations took themselves off the air to do maintenance and service the transmitters and such. And so I became his gopher. I'd have to go to the station at 12 o'clock at night, and we'd work till usually 6 o'clock in the morning until, Chuck Clemens came in, and he was the morning man at that time. And they would, he would start his show for Monday morning. And so I did that for about a year and a half. And then when I began to learn to drive, and it was during those times, by the way, when the station was off the air, Jim taught me how to operate the board, the console, how to segue records, how to use the cart machines. I didn't know anything, and how to play the records and what records were good, and how to cue records and how to operate the board. So that's where I learned all the technical stuff, in being in radio, was from Jim Markham. And he became a very close friend of mine through the course of time. And he was the referee also. Many people don't know this. He was a high school basketball referee, a licensed referee for CBL and CIF football in the Inland Empire. But anyway, he was the coach of my basketball team at one point with the YMCA. And so I had a very close relationship with him through the years. And basically, when I got to be 16 and learned to drive, I began delivering the Cayman entertainers, or the tune sheets. And I had a route. I would go from Redlands to Riverside to Fontana to Chino to Ontario, all through the Inland Empire. And the greatest benefit of it is I got to drive the Cayman News Wagon, which had Cayman 129 on the side. I mean, this was the greatest job in the world. I mean, every time you drive down the street, people were honking and the girls were waving, and man, I was in heaven. I mean, being able to deliver these tune sheets and through all the different stores, and I got to know the people, through the different owners of these different stores, and so it was really Sagis was one of our big, places where they had the tune sheets at. So I did that for quite some time, and then at the same time, every special event that Cayman had, for example, we did a Batmobile when Batman became very popular, and I became Robin, and then we had one of the other guys become Batman, and we had this long hearse. There was a huge black hearse with Cayman on it, Cayman Batmobile, and it wasn't anything close to what was in the show with Adam West, but it was cool. And we had the uniforms and the Batman uniforms, and we would go out and we would do these call-ins to whatever DJ was on the radio at the time. And if you came to the Cayman Batmobile, you'd get certain prizes and music and things like that. So this put me in a really great position because the girls loved it. And that was really at the time the only reason I did it. I mean, I wasn't, I began to do these special events throughout. Everything Cayman did that was on a call-in basis, I did. But they didn't like my name. Bill Watson didn't like Weening, which was my last name. Never could understand how Ted Ziegenbush could have used Ziegenbush all those years. But he did, and he did it successfully, But anyway, Bill Watson didn't like my last name. So he went into a phone book. He opened the phone book, closed his eyes, and just moved the phone book over and then pointed his finger. And he said, let's see. Okay, your last name now on the air is Matthews. And I thought, well, okay, there it is. That's how I got my last name, Matthews, is Bill Watson chose it through a phone book with his finger pointing it into a phone book. And so from there, I continued to do the special events up until about 1967, 68. And then I got very interested in drama. And I had a drama coach. I was in my high school. I'd won the Best Actor Award at my high school. And I really kind of lost touch with the radio side of things, just wasn't really all that interested. I really wanted to pursue some Shakespeare festivals and things that were going on in locally. And so I kind of stepped away from radio for the time and pursued the drama thing, which I really liked and did fairly well at, and had plans to go on and become a teacher. But in 1970, I decided that, gee, I'm not making too much money at drama here. So, I better, do something that I can make some money at. So I went to Ogden's, Bill Ogden's radio school, Rose Radio Operational Engineering School, and got my first class license, which was required at the time to be able to stay alone in the transmitter and things like that. So I went to Ogden's, and by the way, Bill Ogden was probably one of the best school teachers. Anybody that's ever went to Ogden's, as opposed to Don Martin's at the time, which was the alternative, everybody knew that Bill was one of the great. He didn't even have a high school education. He was a guy that was a drill instructor in the Army, and he was good at technical stuff, and he basically formed all this stuff, how to teach people, even taught a blind person how to pass the FCC first class license test, which was extremely difficult to do. And so, I went and completed it. And then when I left Ogden's, my stepdad and Robert E. Walker, who was a morning man that came in, went to the desert, Palm Desert, and started a country station called KGUY, KGUY, which is obviously has some kind of relationship in the name to Cayman because they both came from Cayman. So we did that for about a year. And then after a year and a half working in the country element, I went up, I started my whole career really up in Northern California. I left San Bernardino and I moved up to Stockton. I worked for KSDN for the Bill Drake knockoff station up there. And I worked there for quite some time. I worked for KVML in Sonora. And so I was working at these stations up in the Northern California for about 3-4 years. And then after that time, so I really lost contact with what was going on, in San Bernardino. A funny thing is that Ted Ziegenbush and I had parallel careers during this period of time, and I've never met him to this day. I've never spoken with him. He went to the same high school I did. He was a year younger than me in high school, and apparently he entered into Cayman at that time, hanging around and getting, doing things, which was great for him at a time when I had just stepped out and kind of gone up north and done other different things. And then, he went off to KCAL in 72 or 71, 72, something like that. And I came into Cayman again and then became the program director there through 1980 when we bought KGGI, which was the FM station. And so, it was kind of a sad time because I'd been a part of Cayman when it was so successful, and we tried everything we knew. I had been working at KFXM doing afternoon drive from 1975 through the end of 76. And Jim Zippo in the morning, I was working in the mornings at KFXM. And when Jerry, my stepdad, decided he was going to go back into Cayman again, I took Jim, I got Jim to come with me, and we both went over to Cayman and had a great time at Cayman. Particularly the first couple of years was really great. We had a lot of interesting promotions. It was like going back and really doing it the way it had been done previously. But over the course of time with Cayman, the signal was the problem. And the signal and the fact that AM radio was really dying. I mean, everybody was searching for ways to all talk, religion, different things, to sports, news. And so it was really sad to see it kind of digress over the course of that time when we had a great staff, we had great people, a great leadership. It had a great history, but it was so kind of sad to see those stations, including some of the major market stations in KRLA, KHJ, the same thing was happening with them. And the AM was just kind of dying out. Everybody was moving towards KLOS and KMET. And so it became, with KFXM, their signal was so huge. I mean, it covered everything. And so the signal really was what won out. I heard Dave McCormick, who was a previous program director, came in, and a couple of other guys who were famous Cayman DJs say at one time that when they worked at Cayman, they never even knew who their competition was. They knew of KFXM, but they really didn't even know who the DJs were. And they just kind of did their own thing and went forward and they were successful. So I was glad to have a chance to work at both stations. I was the #1 rated afternoon guy at KFXM. Glad to have been a part of that. I had a great relationship with Howard Tullis, with Al Anthony, Bob Bonnell, Bill Bellman, who was a salesman there, very helpful, gave me a lot of extra, outings to do things when we were doing remotes and things. So I had a good relationship with all of them. and really liked KFXM, really liked Howard until the day he died. I spoke with him 2 days before he had passed away, and he was just headed to Hawaii. So I had a good relationship with him. And then, of course, when I came to Cayman, it was just a lot of fun. It was like coming home again and going through all the old records and seeing everything that the board that Bill Watson had operated, Chuck Clemens had operated, John Ravenscroft had and through these years, it was also important to know that even after that, I maintained a relationship with John Ravenscroft, who was the morning man. He was an English guy that we got basically because of the popularity of the Beatles at that time. And he was very popular, and he had the English accent. And so the people just loved him. And the connection was, of course, to the Beatles at that time, doing their USA tour and the Rolling Stones and a lot of the English invasion people that were doing tours of the United States. So John Ravenscroft became a friend of mine. Of course, his name later, when he went back to England, his name was John Peel. And he became very successful in England as a host, as a presenter, what they call in England a presenter. And he ultimately died of a heart attack in Peru, I believe, in 2002 or 2001, something like that. But a really good guy. We had communication through all that time. So that was kind of my history with Cayman. In 1980, we decided, they wanted to buy a radio station called KGGI. And KGGI was a religious station at that time in Riverside. And the owner that owned it wouldn't speak with anybody from Link Deller, who owned Cayman at that time, wouldn't speak with anybody about selling it because he wanted to keep religion in it. He was afraid he was going to offend his church. And so, my dad, knowing I was involved in the born again Christian movement in Riverside through the Calvary chapels and things, he came and said, "Look, can you go talk to this guy and see if he'll sell? Talk to him." So I went over there off of Main Street in Riverside and went and talked to this guy, and I spent time with him. And he was a bit different in the very beginning, but after a time he began to warm up and we began to talk with it. Finally, he agreed that he would sell the station, and he agreed that he wanted $1 million for it. And I think he thought, seeing me, because I had long hair at the time, and that maybe if he said $1 million, that I think he kind of thought that maybe I was going to buy the station or something. And he basically thought, well, he'll never be able to afford $1 million. So when he said $1 million, I thought, well, gee, that's nothing for Link Deller. I mean, he would take that in a heartbeat. And he did. And the guy followed through. So we were able to get KGGI and get it on. And of course, we thought that was going to be, the transition from Cayman to KGGI, which it was. I mean, it was, FM was the thing. And of course, the rest is history. KGGI became extremely successful, knocked all the AMs off the radio, including KFXM, I mean, over the course of time. And they remain successful to this day. Technology has allowed LA influence to come into the market. And so it was very divided. It was very difficult for the San Bernardino stations, once technology had gotten to a certain point, to compete. And so there's a lot of backstories with all of that, but that's basically the story of Cayman. Their signal just didn't stretch far enough to be able to compete with even a lot of the local stations, that particularly KFXM at that time, which just covered everything. One thing I will say is that in 1978, the Inland Empire Broadcasters Association wanted to do a rating. They wanted to find out what everybody's listenership was, and they didn't want to just use the Arbitron pullout from the Los Angeles survey, because that's what they'd been doing. And so they got together, but it was so much money to do their own study that they just couldn't afford Arbitron to come into the market and do a separate study. But yet all the other stations, other than KFXM, really didn't want to use the Arbitron book because it was too signal favorite. It was too LA intrusion favorite. So they decided that they would go ahead and do a lesser survey called Pulse. Pulse was another company that had been big in several other markets, and they decided that they would do a total survey area and a metro survey area. And they defined it. And the metro survey area being San Bernardino proper, Riverside proper, Redlands, Colton, Rialto. And when they had done the results of that poll showed Cayman, number one in most of the demographics from 18 to 49, and even 1825. So we did our job, but the signal just wasn't going far enough to be able to incorporate a large enough audience to where the LA advertisers would say, look, if Coke came in and said we want to advertise in the Inland Empire, but we don't need to pay anything extra because we're getting that anyway just from the LA listenership from LA. We already spend money in LA. We're going to get San Bernardino and Riverside for free as a bonus. So they wouldn't come into San Bernardino and spend additional money here separately from what they were already doing in LA. That became the problem with the national advertisement. And that was true for all the stations. So that's kind of was San Bernardino's dilemma, and the fact that they had no TV market, a la Bakersfield. They get LA stations, but they have their own TV market. They had their own separate market without any intrusion from anybody else. Unfortunately, San Bernardino was never able to really develop that. But my years at Cayman were special. I loved it. All the DJs that worked there, some great guys, especially the guys in the early years. I knew all of them. I met all of them one time or another. Chuck Christensen, later went on to be the Magic Christian. I stayed with him during the Wake-a-thon when he did in the Singer Sewing Center in Riverside out of Magnolia there. And as much as I could, I slept, he didn't. He was a good guy too. And Mark Dennis was a particularly close friend of mine. He was like my idol at the time amongst all the guys that were there. And he later went on to KEZY in Anaheim and was the program director there. And then I believe went on to work as a traffic person for KFI and KNX, and then later died of a heart attack. But he was a great guy. I knew his wife and kids, and he was really close. I was really close with him. And so a lot of relationships, a lot of different people that we knew, all the promotions, the treasure hunts, which were huge. I covered all of those, the walk back and forth, the talkathons. They used to have a display every year at the Orange Show where they had a big trailer from Winston Head Mobile Homes, and they would construct a studio inside with a glass window where people could go by and see the DJ on the air. And so a lot of those fun type of thing when radio was really fun. And of course, DJs at that time were like superstars. And so, they would go by and would see their favorite DJ, in the booth. And then of course the car wars, that was the big one in '65 when they started the car. And that was probably the highlight of my involvement, was getting to drive a 1965 Shelby Mustang. I mean, if you don't think that was special for a 16-year-old boy, I mean, driving that around the Cayman, and the people seeing that, I mean, that was incredible. I mean, I felt like a superstar with that, and doing the remotes and the different places we would take it where people could see it. Then they finally agreed, KFXM and Cayman finally agreed in 68, I believe, 67 or 68, not to do car giveaways anymore. It just became too expensive, and usually they would get their cars from Bill Ellis Ford in Rialto, who was a huge advertiser in the Inland Empire at that time. But that was probably the highlight, was doing the car, driving the 19s. And even today, if anybody could drive a 66 Shelby Mustang original, man, that would be a huge, those things are worth, a couple $100,000 right now. So that's kind of my story. But, if you guys have questions, I'm certainly glad to answer them.
It's been suggested by several people that Cayman was, I guess you could call it, the laboratory that Boss Radio came out of.
Well, and that would be certainly appropriate. I mean, Bill Watson, all you have to say is the names. Bill Watson and Ron Jacobs. I mean, Lyle Kilgore, he went to KHJ as a newsman. So, all of those guys were part of that and part of that time. And of course, going up to a major market like that, and not just as DJs. I mean, because really, Ron Jacobs and Bill Watson didn't go as DJs. They went as program directors, management consultants, and so they had input into the formulation of Boss Radio. And so, it's a very appropriate way of looking at it.
How did you transition from leaving San Bernardino and then starting Cayman again?
Well, actually, it was totally quite by surprise. And I had the number one rated afternoon show at KFXM. I had followed Bruce Chandler, into KFXM. I think there was one other guy, Bobby West, who came out. I think he was the previous afternoon guy. But I was right within that same period of time. And so, I loved KFXM. I was doing well there, and we were having a great time there. And with Zippo and my friend Ted Brown, who was the midday and program director, and we just had a really good time. And I was quite surprised when family called and said, "Look, we've got Cayman again. What do you want to do?" And so I thought about it and thought about it. And I talked to Zippo about it, and he goes, "Man, that would be so cool." And we actually had this rock that we found. You've probably, Doug Kilgaro, and there's been stories, how did the rock come about, KFXM, the Rock of the Inland Empire. But we went one night and stole it. We used to have it sitting outside the window at KFXM. So Zip and I went out there one night. We had to get this truck, and we had to get about 10 guys, and we stole the thing and brought it over to Cayman and stuck it out there. And then, so that just created a little more competition and more fun stuff that goes back and forth. But it was tough. And when we decided to leave, we did, and it was just a lot of fun and no regrets. It was the right time, and we just had a lot of fun with it. But I had a lot of close friends at KFXM. Maxine Stillwell, who she was the bookkeeper at KFXM at that time. She also was the bookkeeper at Cayman from 62 through about 72 or 71. And so she, I knew her because she'd been the bookkeeper at Cayman previously. And so, it just does all those relationships. Everybody knew everybody. All the KFXM people, salesmen, knew the Cayman salespeople. They all knew. There was just a tie-in. And Bill Bellman, who was one of my favorite people in the world, was a salesman at KFXM. I love that man. He was really good to me, and a really good Jewish man that just had a great heart, and loved him, and he gave me a lot of remotes and things to do for him and outside. And so I had a lot of close connections there, and so it's a time in life. But I always knew, as I was going through this period of time, there was always that basically by the time I was 30, it was going to end. I wasn't going to be a DJ for life. And that was kind of the sentiment of most people. And there were a few that did, that like Ted Ziegenbusch, who's had a fabulous career. He's gone on and done he was so passionate about it that I think that's what carried him through. And he went in and he lasted. He was, all the way up until just last year, I believe. He did really, really well. But not everybody had that longevity. And Johnny Helm was also a very, very close friend of mine. In both cases, Johnny, I worked with him at KFXM, and I worked with him at Cayman. And I had contact with Johnny all through the years. And in fact, when I started the online Cayman, Johnny was working for the KFXM in the desert, and he was having some problems there. And he sent me a Facebook Messenger and wanted to know if I'd be interested in putting his stuff on Cayman. Duh, of course, Johnny, glad to do it, And so we were actually going to transfer his show onto Cayman at the time and then he passed away about a month later. We were never able to really, to get it on. His daughter and I are friends, Amber, but he was a very close friend of mine as well. But when I left Cayman in 1980, I continued to do a lot of production work for Quinn Lamb, for a lot of the different advertising agencies in San Bernardino. I was doing the De Anza Theater concert series. So I made good money doing that, more than I made as a DJ. And I continued that for probably 10, 12 years after that, just kind of at the side. And so radio just kind of, by the time it hit 2000, it was pretty much over. And at that time, I'd gone and studied law and, and had gone into that. And so, it just, life moved on for me, but I've always had an attraction to doing something. And when Cayman Online, Harley Davidson had started it. He did a great job. He's a good guy and real professional. And basically when they had problems because they were going to be forced to pay royalties on the music that they were playing. Well, with me living in the Philippines, I didn't have that same commitment or that same obligation, because it's all a different agreement. And so I moved it over here, reformed everything, built this studio. I don't know if you guys can see the studio here. This is the studio.
Wow.
And, it's just as professional as you can get. I've got all the processing equipment,
I don't see the sign that says it's never 59 degrees.
Yeah, I don't have that one. I have some KFXM stuff in here, and in the Cayman too. My mom has got a lot of those pictures. Anyway, let me put this back in here. Is that good?
That's great. When did you take over the online Cayman?
I think it was probably in 2014, 2013, 2014, as best I can remember. I don't exactly know, something like that. We had to buy the new software. That everything is based on software these days to program it. And so, what songs are coming up and you can program it. And so I don't really know exactly what year it was. I think I've been doing it for probably, I would say 5 or 6 years that I've had it here now, Yeah. And then we have I Remember Cayman, which is the Facebook site, which I don't own. I have a permission to post on it, but I think it's owned by some other people. I think Harley was involved and Tim Abney, who I've never met, but he was a former, he was formerly involved to some degree in the formation of I Remember Cayman, but they own that site. But we do have our own email address, kmen1290@gmail.com. And so people that want to write to us, request a song, do any of that, they can do it there, and we'll certainly acknowledge them on the air and play the song as well. So if you don't know about Cayman today, there's a couple of different apps. Whatever you have, tunein.com. You can go to tunein.com, download the app, and Cayman is right there. And you can listen to see what's going on with Cayman these days.
Do you ever, the shows you're doing, do you ever do anything live now, or is it just all canned? Or
I wished I had the time, Mike. Honestly, I would love to do it. I really would love to do it. I'm set up for it. I've got a full studio here with all the processing and everything. And I've actually often thought about doing so, but that's more of a commitment you do on a regular basis than a one-off scene. So,
well, thanks a lot, Mike. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. I'll be watching this 3 or 4 times again myself. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Great. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to talk about such an important past regarding Cayman and KFXM and my relationships with the people. And if anything develops in the future, let me know. More than happy to speak with you again.
Great. I'm sure we'll take you up on that.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks
guys.
a lot, Mike.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Talk to you later.
Okay, then. All right.
Mike.
It was a warm summer night that I saw